Fishing is a sport with a lot of intangibles, all which have some influence, although varying and usually difficult to measure with absolute certainty on the angler's success. Some fishermen are more astute than others, some are just plain luckier than others, and some are blessed with more natural talent. Yet, all can improve if they desire to and if they're willing to make the effort. One of the major factors is confidence, an elusive quality that is particularly lacking in new or inexperienced fishermen. Confidence can't be bought in a sporting goods store or acquired from a successful or experienced angler. It's primarily earned through experience. You'll never learn everything there is to know about fishing. I can promise you that. You acquire confidence through learning, experiencing, developing, and understanding the habits and habitats of your quarry by mastering the fine points of your tackle and by slowly putting together the pieces of the fishing jigsaw puzzle. Just going out and catching a couple of fish, well, that's a big boost to the novice's confidence. So is having and knowing how to use good equipment. I'll never forget when my grandfather gave me my first rod and reel. It was a pretty nice outfit, nothing to compare to this. But the mere possession of that equipment made me feel like I could be a much more successful angler through using it. Sure, that's a psychological ploy, but for some people it works. The very fact that they have good equipment instills in them the desire to achieve and the motivation to learn and become more skilled. I also remember when I first started fishing, how frustrating it was just to go out on those days and just bomb out. And believe you me, they were many. Even today, I don't know a man alive that catches fish every time he goes. And when I meet that man, I want to get in the boat with him. I used to even wonder when I'd catch more than 2 fish on each outing. Then that progressed to wondering if I'd ever catch a limit. And that changed to wondering about a big fish limit. But I stopped wondering a long time ago. No, that's not true. I do wonder, and I still wonder how nice it would be to maybe catch a state record or maybe even a world record. Well, that's another story. The point is that as you learn and as your abilities grow, your level of fishing competence rises, and you become more successful. Success breeds confidence, which in turn may foster greater success. Every move that a good fisherman makes is related to confidence. In the selection of which lure to use, in the selection of the area to fish, in the placement of his cast, in judging whether to stay or leave a particular spot, in determining what type of retrieve to use, and it goes on and on. Because a fisherman is confident, he concentrates harder on what he's doing and is generally more attentive to the refinements of the fishing world. At the same time, he realizes that not every cast will produce a fish, nor will every day be a good one. He realizes that fish are unpredictable creatures and that he can't always figure them out, which is probably why he fishes in the first place. Yet, there isn't a top-notch salmon, walleye, crappie, bluegill, catfish, or bass angler I know who isn't convinced that there's a fish there. Every time he makes that cast, he can actually see that fish right there before that cast is made, and he's totally convinced he's going to catch it. When he gets to that point, well, he's got the confidence. And don't overlook the effects of feeling positive about your abilities and about your understanding of the world of angling. If I've said this once, I've said it 1,000 times. Well-placed confidence may be just the one greatest lure in your tackle box. So, for the next hour, sit back, relax, as we cast out some helpful hints and tips that may help you catch more fish today, tomorrow, next week, or even in the years to come. You know, years and years ago, monofilament line replaced braided line. And monofilament line has been some mighty good stuff. But monofilament line has faults, just like anything. The worst fault is that monofilament line stretches. The longer it's in the water, it absorbs water. And the more water it absorbs, the more stretchy it becomes. Well, today, there's a new product on the market called cofilament. And what cofilament is really one line inside a line. It has a nylon outer shell and a polyester core inside it. The polyester core is a low stretch material, meaning that with low stretch in the cofilament, you have 50% less stretch than you do in monofilament line. Plus the fact you've got the sensitivity factor is absolutely unbelievable. You can feel so much better with the cofilaments, much more than you could with the monofilaments, much more. But the key to it, it helps you as an angler get a much better hook set. It helps you maintain your maximum pounds or improves your maximum pounds of hook setting pressure. So cofilament line is replacing the monofilament lines on most reels, whether it be spin cast, whether it be spinning, or whether it be bait casting. A very, very good product, and if you've never used it and you're having problems in using or in getting good hook sets or feeling what a particular bait's doing, you ought to try, get away from, let's say, the monofilaments and try the cofilament lines. It'll sure make a difference in your fishing. How many times you walk up, open your storage box, you reach in to get a rod, and you try to pull one rod out, but you can't pull it out because the tip's all hung. It's hung with the other rods that are in the box. And the only way you can do it is either try to pull all your rods out. Sometimes you've got a lure that's hung up here and you break rod tips. Well, let me show you a simple tip. Whether it be in a storage box in a boat or in the back of your truck or in the back of your car, fishermen invariably will take their fishing rods. And what happens, one line goes in, or a rod tip goes in through another rod tip, and then that tip is turned over, and then when you try to pull them apart, all you've got is a big mess. Well, let me show you how you can eliminate that. One simple way is when you finish fishing, take the rod, place the lure on either a hook hanger that's on the rod or place it on the reel. Catch your monofilament line and go 1, 2, 3. Wrap it right around that rod, just like that. Take the other rod, same way. 1, 2, 3. Just lace it around there. That way, when you store them or put them in your truck or in your storage box and you get ready to pull one rod out of a particular action you might want to use, when you pull it out, it's like pulling a sword out of a sheath. It comes out simple as 1, 2, 3. That's a big old black male right there. Now see, this one right here is, that's a male crappie. But what they do, they go through a hormone change when they start bedding. And after a period of time, after they bed and move back out, that fish right there will turn real white again. That's not the black species.
Yeah, that's the hardest thing for me to tell.
Well, you can usually tell by the little specks and dots and so forth on, but that is a male crappie right there, a male white crappie, but they go through a hormone change, you know, when it's time to spawn.
And it looks almost identical to a black crappie.
Yeah.
It's just still hard for me to tell.
Let me show you what the difference is. Look at this diagram of the two. While both fish, the black and the white crappie, resemble each other in body shape and general appearance, there are some fairly significant physical differences. Generally, both species have black or greenish colored backs, irregular, dark splotches on their silver sides, and a white stomach. Normally, the white crappie is paler, and its spots are arranged in dark vertical bars on its sides. The black has more of a mottled appearance. However, identification can be tricky, so don't rely on color alone to identify a fish. The dorsal fin is shorter on the white than on the black crappie and is a reliable distinguishing characteristic. Usually the white crappie has only 6 spines in the dorsal fin, while the black has 7 to 8. Now another difference is the distance from the dorsal fin to the eye. Now on the white crappie, the distance from the front of the dorsal fin to the eye is definitely longer than the length of the dorsal fin. In contrast, this distance and the length on the dorsal fin are about equal on the black crappie.
I just didn't know that, Bill.
Know what?
About the white crappie turning black.
Look, let me show you something. Because I saw it a while ago. Let me see if I can find one. Yeah, there's one. There's another one right there. All right, I'll show you something. You see these two fish? They're both white crappie. The bottom crappie, that's a female. It's got eggs in her.
Yeah.
Right here.
Yeah,
that's a female white crappie. That is a male white crappie. But he goes through that change right there in the springtime.
There's no telling how many people have thought all these years that that's a black crappie. I have. I've been doing this for 25 years.
I wish we had a black crappie and I could show you the difference, but if you'll remember that diagram I showed you, you can get a good idea.
Yeah.
But that is a black, that's a white male crappie right here, right there. And that's a female right there. She's full of roe, and he's in it. Look how flat his stomach is.
That's fascinating.
Let me show you a little technique that I like to do instead of, not to take anything away from flipping, but I do a lot of pitching, and I can be a lot more versatile by pitching than I can by flipping. Now, I've got a 6.5 foot rod. I could get this in a 7 or 7.5 foot rod that would have a tremendous amount of backbone. This is a fast action rod, about an 80-20 action. It's got a lot of power. But what I can do with this, I can flip with it if I want to. I can take the line, I can flip. I can control a certain distance away from me, say up to about 15 feet. But when I get much more line out, let's say, than that 15, when I'm flipping, it's difficult to control. But what I can do with pitching, I can cover a much broader area, objects much further away from me. Now, to hit that post way out there or go in between those posts, it would require quite a bit of line. But what I can do with this, I can take it and I can pitch it and drop right in there where I want to. The accuracy, I can just pinpoint it just by swinging it, creating a pendulum effect, letting the bait hang down about 3 or 4 feet off the rod tip and then catching it swinging. But there's several other things that I can do. I can cast with it if I want to, what that is difficult to do with flipping. Or if I want to just pick it up and let's say cast it, I can cast it. If I want to flip, as I showed you earlier, I can flip with it. But the key thing I can do with it, I can pitch with it. I can work areas 30 feet away where it'd be difficult with a flipping stick. Another thing I can do with it, I can take it if I've got a low-hanging limb or a low dock and I want to get back up under. I can take the rod and hold the rod low and throw it and skip it. Now, I skipped that bait right then about 4 feet. It hit the water and skipped about 4 feet. I can skip it back up under cover, and that's difficult to do with, say, a flipping stick. So, as far as the versatility of, say, pitching versus flipping, not to take anything away from flipping, because I know there's a lot of people enjoy doing that, but with this, I can be a lot more versatile. I can reach out and hit objects much further out and control my line much better than I can, let's say, with a flipping rod. If I wanted to spin this boat like I'm going to do right now, and I wanted to reach way through there toward that stump that's just a little bit right off way over in there, all I can do is just take it, and there it is, right on it. But I've got enough backbone and strength in this rod that I can control a heavy fish if he hits me that far out or if he runs into thick cover. So it just takes a little bit of practice and learning how to use this thing. at here. Boy. Talking about a strong buster. You believe it? That thing just keeps on jumping. Well, look at that. I'll bring all that weight up out of the water. Honey bunny. Well, I'm telling you, you can quit, will you? I'm not going to try to wear you down. Well, I'd be dead gone. Now, let me jump. Let me jump. Well, I had you hooked in the best place in the world. You know, we talk about hooks. Let me try to show you an illustration and explain to you why one hook seems to work, or one style of hook seems to work best for plastic worm fishing. In this illustration, we have pictured two different styles of worm hooks. Both are the same size, 3/0. The key difference between these hooks is that one is a Sproat, the other is not. Of the two, the Sproat is my #1 choice. And let me tell you why. I feel with a Sproat style, you'll increase your hook sets by 50% because there's less steel to drive through the worm and into the mouth of the fish. Now, look at the distance from the barb to the throat on the Sproat hook opposed to the other style. There's a shorter distance on the Sproat, which will definitely give you a quicker and give you much better hook penetration. Another key is that on many Sproat style hooks, the steel diameter is smaller, which helps an angler maintain his maximum pounds of hook setting pressure. Example, it's much easier to push a straight pin into a potato than it is a nail. So, if you're having trouble getting a good hook set, you might think about what we've discussed. Without question, 12-volt batteries can be puzzling to fishermen who own boats because generally they're out of sight, out of mind. Anglers are always asking the question, how do I know what battery is best for my boat? Well, first of all, your boat should be equipped with a marine battery rather than an automotive battery. Marine units are built tough to withstand constant pounding and vibration. The next step is to decide how many batteries you need. A starting battery, like we have here, of course, can crank an engine, but it's not recommended for use as a power source for electrical accessories like depth finders, graphs, aerators, or even trolling motors and other equipment turned on for long periods at a time. A starting battery used in this capacity discharges quickly and has a severely shortened lifespan. Now, for boats with many accessories on board, an additional battery known as a deep cycle battery is built differently to supply a steady flow of current for hours at a time. Used as a continuous power source, a deep cycle battery, like we have right here, lasts many times longer than a regular starting battery. You know, here's another tip on fishing a crankbait. A lot of people seem to think with a crankbait that when you throw that crankbait out, let's say you've got it running true, you make a long cast with a bait. Naturally, the further you throw it, the deeper the bait's going to go. So, many times you may not want the bait to go as deep. Let's say you may have fish suspended. So naturally, if you've got a bait that runs 10 feet deep and you've got fish suspended at 5, you don't want to make as long a cast and come under the fish. But many times with a crankbait, people believe that naturally the faster they reel it, the deeper the bait's going to go. Well, that's not necessarily true. What happens if you take the bait and you just burn it as fast as you can possibly burn it, just as fast as you can? The bait is going to run just so far and it's going to stop and it's going to maintain a certain depth level. And the reason for that, what happens is, let me bring this bait in and I'll show you what I'm talking about. You build up so much pressure on that lip that it affects the action of the bait. In other words, on a deep diving bait, if you burn it real fast at a high speed, let's say with a high speed reel, what happens? The water, instead of going off the right and left side of the lip to make the bait dive to its maximum depth, what happens is that water begins to build up on the front of the lip. And what happens then, the bait comes forward and it maintains a wet stick effect. It'll wiggle a little bit, but the pressure's so great it's coming off the front of the lip than off the side of the lip. So one key way of fishing the bait, let's say you want it to bump the bottom or you want it to get down to its maximum depth. What you want to do, 4 or 5 fast turns will get the bait started, but a slow type moderate retrieve will drive that bait deeper. But it's important when fishing a crankbait is to give it an erratic action, like 3 or 4 faster turns and then a slow moderate turn, and sometimes even stopping it, twitching it a little bit and then speeding it up. But you're changing the action of it. And what it imitates is something crippled or injured. And fish zero in on that. I've seen the times that I could make a cast with a crankbait into a school of fish that were inactive and just reel it right through them. They wouldn't take it. But let me change the action on it and bang, that's all it'd take. So it's important to remember, in retrieving the bait, for it to get to its maximum depth, a slow moderate type retrieve will drive the bait deeper. And once you get the bait to the desired depth, what you want to do then is create an erratic action to the bait. And you'll be surprised how many more fish you'll catch on a crankbait by fishing it that way. Ready for another tip? We'll listen to this one. Come on. See, by holding that rod in an upward position, I can handle that fish any way he runs. In other words, after I set the hook, I want to keep that rod up. If the fish runs to the left, I can play him to the right. If he runs to the right for cover, I can play him to the left. If he runs straight at me, I've got leverage enough that I can handle him. So many people make the mistake. They'll fight a fish with the rod down, or they see the fish jump if it's a good fish, and they change the position of their rod, and they lose a lot of fish as a result of that. You got a lot more leverage by holding that rod up and fighting the fish in an upward position. I've seen a lot of big fish hung on plastic worms, and when the guy gets the fish on, he sees the line start coming up like the fish is going to jump, and he tries to stick his rod down into the water, and what happens? He throws slack to the fish, and the fish many times can get off. Have you ever been accused of loss of memory? For example, birthdays, anniversaries, a phone number, or even a name? Well, the results are often embarrassing, to put it mildly. Memory is defined as a power, act, or process of recalling to mind facts previously learned or experienced. Does this apply to fish? You bet it does. However, the learning ability of fish is not comparable among different species. Some of the poorest learners are the bluegill, the northern pike, and the yellow perch. Better learners would include the striped bass, the common carp, channel catfish, and largemouth. There does not appear to be a significant difference, however, between the learning abilities of juvenile or mature fish, which is certainly different from us. Once exposed to an experience or an event, just how long can a fish remember? Well, according to those in the know, biologists and ichthyologists state it depends on 2 components: the degree of reinforcement and the diagnostic characteristics of the event. Specifically, if a fish is caught on a lure like a spinnerbait, a buzzbait, a topwater bait, or a crankbait, and is exposed to the same bait every second day for 2 weeks, the fish will not normally strike that lure at any time over the next 20 days. That's right, 20 days. This is not only relevant to the fish that was initially caught, but it also impacts other fish that were observers. However, there is one lure, just one, that can be labeled the non-memory bait, and that's the plastic worm. The same fish, as well as its buddies, can be caught day after day on the plastic worm. The diagnostic characteristics of the plastic worm do not stimulate memory. Many bass anglers live by the saying, points point out fish. And on most lakes this is true. The basic configuration of many points can be determined by studying the visible terrain above water. Steep hillsides and bluffs often indicate fast-falling points, while flatter shorelines usually mean longer, more gentle points. So of all the short, long, round, high, narrow, steep, even flat points, what makes one better than another? Well, if you were to limit the experienced structure fisherman to one type of underwater terrain, his number one choice would undoubtedly be a creek or river channel that runs in close or touches a point, which is called a channel point. And this type point is what makes one better than another. And to give you a better insight on what a channel point looks like, well, it looks like this. You'll notice 3 points extending out into the lake. And all 3 points in this illustration, number 1, number 2, and number 3, look as if they would hold bass. And they very well might. But point number 2 would obviously be the most productive, especially for bigger fish and schools of fish. The reason's simple, because point 2 is a creek bed point.
Bill, is there a secret to putting cofilament line on a spinning reel?
You bet. I think the major problem that a lot of people make is overfilling the spool itself. The real key, once the line goes on, is to stop within about 1/8 of an inch of the top of the flange. Now, that's very, very important. If you put too much on it, what happens? It wants to override and balloon or cobweb off when you make a cast. So the key in putting it on, stop it at just about 1/8 of an inch at the top of the flange. Another mistake is not putting enough line on the reel. What happens then, you have to work much harder to let the rod tip and the rod throw the line off of the reel. In other words, there's too much line, too much friction building up with not enough line on the spool itself. When it comes up over the flange, you get quite a bit of rod slap or line slap on the rod itself as it goes through the stripper. And this limits your cast and your control. So the key is to always fill the reel within about 1/8 of an inch.
Bill, have you got any other tips to avoid line twist?
There's several different ways that you can avoid line twist. One is the way that you put the line on the reel. What I like to do is to take an empty spool, run the line off of the supply spool, through the tip of the rod, bring it down, and tie to my reel itself. Now, once I get the knot tied, I put a little slip knot, pull it up tight, right at the base of the spool, and I start putting the line on the reel. After 4 or 5 fast turns, what I do then, I take the line and bring it against the spool. I pick the spool up. If the line spins around real tight, it's coming off of the supply spool the wrong way. Sometimes it's a label up, sometimes it's a label down. What happens if you're getting a lot of twists like that, what you want to do is just take the spool and reverse it and bring it off. It must come off of the supply spool or the refill spool the same way it went on. Sometime back, we talked to you about how to select the proper battery for your boat. Well, today I want to talk to you about charging boat batteries. Now, this can be a dangerous task if you're not very careful. Batteries produce explosive gases while charging, so it's suggested you work in a well-ventilated area. It's also important that you don't smoke, if you do, or keep any spark-causing sources nearby. Also, make sure that the charger switch, right here, is off or unplugged when connecting or disconnecting the charger leads from the battery. Prompt charging is important because a battery left completely or even partially discharged for long periods of time will lose its effectiveness. Also, make sure that you have the proper size charger because one that's too small will not do the job in a reasonable amount of time. Another thing, never charge a battery too long. 16 hours should be the maximum time. Now, quick charging works fine for automotive or starting batteries, but it's not recommended for a deep cycle battery, which, without question, is the best battery for boats, especially boats with lots of electrical accessories. Oh, they come off that point and go straight down. Get in that timber. Okay, come on. Come on. You swallowed that thing, boy. Fool again. Love it. You know, it's really difficult to find these type areas without the help of a good map, a graph, or even a depth finder, like we talked about earlier, or without someone showing you or telling you about this kind of place. The good thing about a map is that it'll show you exactly where the channel runs. It'll show you the channel flats, the channel banks, and the channel points like we're fishing today. The important thing to remember is that when you establish a terrain pattern and a depth pattern, a map will save you lots of time in looking for other channel points in the same area. And if one point like this is holding bass, others in the area could hold a school also. For example, here on this illustration, we see a cove with 6 different points. It's possible that a fish could be at any one of these points, but why waste a lot of time fishing each one of them? Play the odds to maximize your fishing. That means that only those points with a creek channel nearby should be fished. These, without question, are always the best bet. By looking at this artwork, you should have already determined that point number 2 and point number 6 should be the best because the channel moves right by them. Your goal should be to fish the high percentage areas and most productive water during the day. So, to save time, fish point number 2 and number 6, then move on to another point that has a channel skirting in close to it. I can't promise you a school of bass on every one you fish, but I can promise you, if you fish enough of these, you'll acquire a tremendous amount of experience, and sooner or later, find that school of smart college graduates that are fat, sassy, mean, and scrappy, and lurk on what we call channel points. Let me tell you, now we talk about setting the hook. There's a hit right there. Come on up here, you hard fighting thing, you. Well, little fat pudgy thing, you. We talk about setting the hook. Several things you don't want to do with a plastic worm is let a fish swim with that plastic worm. When he hits him, you want to hit him real quick. By letting him swim with the plastic worm, what you do, you take the chance of moving more catchable fish off of that particular spot. And the way you want to set the hook, you want to set the hook with your wrist and your forearm, not your back and bringing the rod way over your head. Because most of your power is right in here. If you were going to open a jar of pickles or some type of mayonnaise or something, and the jar wouldn't open, you sure wouldn't want to put it over your head. You put it where your strength is, and your strength is right there. So when you set that hook, that's where you want to set it. When you feel a thump, the hit, you take up the slack, and boom, set that hook by bringing that rod right back in to your chest and using your wrist to help set that hook. Your wrist and forearms is a way to set a hook. Another key thing to remember is that when you're fishing, you make the cast, take the reel and place your hands high on it. That way the palming plate, you've got more leverage this way than you do by holding the reel handle this way. You can put the reel into your stomach, you've got more leverage to work with than by trying to fight a fish this way. If you fight a fish this way, the fish has a tendency to wear on your wrist. You have no place to put the handle. But if you palm it high, you've got better feel and you've got more leverage that you can bring the butt of the rod into your stomach or to your chest to help hold it. Tell you another thing that's extremely important when it comes to worm fishing is the type of rod you're using. I didn't say the make of rod. We're talking about the type of rod, the action of the rod. There's a lot of different actions in rods. You've got your parabolical actions, you've got your light actions, you've got your medium, medium light, medium heavy, heavy. But of all the different types of actions and materials in rods, from your composites to your graphites to your borons to your Kevlars, whether it be a $19 rod or a $119 rod, the ideal action is an action we refer to as fast. And a fast action rod is a rod with about 20% tip and 80% backbone. That's called a 20-80 action. All right, the purpose for that, the 20% of that tip helps us feel what that bait's doing at all times, but the 80% of the backbone enables us or helps us to maintain our maximum pounds of hook setting pressure. Therefore, when we hit a fish, we've got 80% of that rod to help us drive that hook home. To give you a little bit better insight, let's look at 3 different actions and we'll explain it to you off of these illustrations. Pictured here are 3 rod actions. An 80-20 action, which is classified as a fast action, a 60-40, which is a medium action, and a light action, which is classified as a 50-50 action. The 80-20 action has its own personality, and it's the ideal action for jig and eel or worm fishing. It'll not only help you feel the lure much better, but it will definitely help you get a much better hook set, which will naturally land you more fish. The words bass and lily pads are almost synonymous. From the time a youngster begins his fishing career, he learns that bass hang out around lily pads, waiting for a shad, a minnow, a frog, or even a crawfish to happen by. Lily pad fishing requires a lot of patience because there's usually large areas of pads, and it takes time to find the fish. Pads are referred to as objects, which grow in the shallows, which makes the area somewhat sensitive and dictates a quiet approach. Here we go, right here. Come on. I know you're a fish. I can see part of your tail. I'm gonna put you back now. Grow up. You never know. You know, I really like fishing this type of an object, and I classify lily pads as objects. As with most objects, I search for fish only in the key areas where bass are likely to be. Now, Mother Nature arranges lily pads in all shapes and sizes. Some cover an area only 1/4 of an acre in size, and others spread out over hundreds of acres. I mean, this whole area from here up through here all the way back is hundreds of acres of pads. Now, fishing a large area of pads, let's say a half a mile to a mile long, will take the better part of a day because pads must be fished slowly and thoroughly. Now, a far more logical approach is to select key areas. You don't want to waste a lot of time fishing look-alike areas which fail to produce, say, after a cast or two. You want to search the pad line, right up that pad line, for irregular features. You might want to try a point of pads, for instance. Make a series of casts across it, say 10 to 15 feet down each side, then move down the pad line to the next key irregular feature. There's no question you could catch a bass or two by fishing along the entire rim of the pad field, but odds are better for you if you fish the key areas. Now let's take a look at this illustration of a typical lily pad field and discuss boat position and casting patterns. Take a look at position 1. The beginning of a pad field is a good producer. The water is usually shallowest here. Now, if the shoreline is within casting distance, it's a good practice here to cast up onto the bank, if at all possible, instead of banging the lure into the water. Often bass in this area are easier to spook. It's best to make several casts around this area. Fish early or late when the bass move through to feed, especially on bright sunny days. Now, on cloudy days, this area can be good throughout the day. Here at position 2, a point of pads. It's always a prime area to fish. Later in the day and during weather changes, bass move from shallow areas out to the pad points. Begin by fan casting as you approach. Make several casts to the same spot. This can really entice bass into striking. Work your lure both fast and slow on one series of casts, then really slow it down. Ease it from atop one pad to another. Allow it to settle a few seconds before moving it on. Bass many times will explode up through the pads in a murderous frenzy, knocking the lure free and engulfing it as it falls off the pad into the water. Stay prepared, because action like this can give you a mild case of heart failure. On still another series of casts, work the lure out to the last pad along the edge and then let it fall, assuming you're fishing a bait that will sink, like a worm, a spoon, and always keep tension on the line. As an alternative, work the lure out to the last pad, hesitate a couple of seconds, and then let it slide off very lightly. And you'd better hang on here with both hands also. Okay, at position 3. Bass often school in great numbers in pad pockets. It's best to cast down along the edge, follow up across the back edge of the pocket. If the pocket's deep, move the boat into the pocket and work the entire area slowly and methodically. Position 4. Move out of the pocket, fan some cast across the other point and 15 to 20 feet along each edge. Position 5. At this key area, you could latch onto a real biggie. This sketch depicts a major creek channel, but a relatively small ditch or even a depression will attract many fish here. Frankly, it's rare to find, but when you do find one, you really want to work it with a variety of presentations and lures. A slow to fast retrieve on top of the water, just under the surface, and also on the bottom. Before leaving this position, back off about 15 to 20 feet and cast back into the pads. Position 6. We've emphasized a number of times that isolated objects produce bass, and lily pads are no exception. It's almost a sure bet that when bass are using pads, 1 or 2 fish will be around any isolated ones. Now, this may sound odd, but it's true. I've spent an entire day working a large area of pads only to turn around and catch a limit of fish from small isolated patches. And many bass fishermen just don't take the time to move within casting range of these, but you can bet that this fat boy never passes them up. Now, at position 7, at certain times, one side of a point, a pocket, or an edge will produce better than the other. The reason? Well, it has more shade. Early and late in the day, the angle of the sun will cast shade further from the edge. If the sun is shining from the west at a 45-degree angle, the east side will naturally have more shade, and bass on the west side will be driven further back under the pads. This is why on sunny days, bass will strike better on one side of the point of pads in the morning and then hit better on the other side that afternoon. The same phenomenon can occur in a pocket opening or at one end of a pad field opposite the sun rays. Okay, position 8. Don't overlook isolated openings out in the pads. Of course, these are difficult to fish unless you can work your boat into the edge without making too much noise. A well-placed cast here can certainly entice a strike, but getting a hooked fish out through the tangle can be almost impossible. It's best to carry a long, stout push pole and pole your way to the hooked fish inside the pads. Surprisingly, this method of approach is quieter than using electric trolling motor. Position 9. You want to fish this area the same as you did at position 1. Keep in mind the angle of the sun. Now let's move to position 10. This is another key area that's highly rewarding but difficult to cast to. After fishing all other areas, work the boat into the pads and make a series of casts to the shore points on each side.
You know, we're talking about depth. You know, you can determine the skill of a fisherman by the second question he asks you. If you see someone on the lake, he might ask, "How you doing?" or "How's fishing?" You reply by telling him you managed to fool a few fish into striking. But the most important question that he could ask you is the depth at which you caught your fish. Beginners have a tendency to begin a line of questioning about what lure you were using, or what color, or how you worked it, or what part of the lake. Were you up the lake or you were down the lake? But a knowledgeable fisherman needs only to know the depth and the pattern, and he can put every piece of the puzzle together. The single most important factor in bass fishing is finding the right depth. You can fish the greatest lure ever made at the wrong depth, and naturally you won't catch fish. But you can fish the worst lure ever made at the correct depth, and you'll definitely improve your odds tremendously. You've got to be on their depth level to be able to catch them. Here's got one. Another chunky one. What they do when they come off that 5-foot ledge is sound right off in that channel. In this clear water, they don't want to come up until I pull them up. Gotta get down, it's got another. Look at here at this one, another chunky fish. Come on, come on there. Come on. Strong. It's my time. Come on. Blunt nose thing. Fooled again. On your next fishing trip, you want to give some thought about why you're keeping fish. Now, if you're keeping them to eat, then the prime concern should be to take care of them. If you're keeping them only to show them off, well, perhaps you need to think about why you're fishing. Now, before you leave home, decide if you're going to keep or release your catch. Being prepared in advance ensures a greater survival rate for released fish and better tasting fish for the table. Fresh fish flesh is extremely delicate. Besides being delicate, fish are extremely perishable. Lots of red meat improves with age, but not fish, which begins to deteriorate at death. It's a fact that fish can never taste as fresh as they do when they come directly out of the water. Still, proper handling procedures slows deterioration and maintains fish quality. Bacterial growth and enzyme actions are two primary enemies of fresh fish. In order to keep fish, let's say, fit for the table, anglers must fight them from the time they're hooked till the time they're caught, until the time they're cleaned, to the time they're cooked. Now, freshly caught fish are in fine shape, but how fishermen handle that catch will determine if they stay that way. Too many anglers lose a battle by not caring or knowing enough to win. Fish are often allowed to die slowly on a stringer or back there in a live well, and then they aren't cleaned or properly cooled. This allows digestive enzymes to eat through the stomach wall and taint the meat. It also lets bacteria spread to start the spoiling process. When the fish are finally cleaned, it's normally with a bacteria-laced fillet knife, and there's no regard whatsoever for cleanliness at the fillet table. Fillets covered with juices from fish's entrails are piled on top of one another to fester in the sun. By the time the fish reaches the pan, it looks bad, it even smells bad, and if anyone could eat it, it tastes worse. It's a sad fate for a fine fish. To help prevent deterioration of fish, here are a few tips you should practice. Number 1, try if possible to keep fish alive until just before you clean them. I know this is difficult to do many times, but if there's any way possible to keep them alive, do so. If you catch a fish and it should die, it's best that the fish be cleaned, bled, and washed immediately. And don't be afraid to rinse your fillet in the lake water. This will reduce bacteria and wash off enzymes. Use a clean fillet knife and clean the blade after each fish. As I mentioned earlier, don't pile fillets on top of each other and let them fester in the hot sun. This only spreads more germs. If you're cleaning your catch at the lake, place fillets into a plastic bag and place into your cooler into crushed ice. Proper storage becomes vital. Chilling your fillets halts bacterial growth. Once home, re-clean by washing your fillets with tap water and soak them several hours in salt water or salt-treated water before eating or freezing. And don't be afraid to use lots of salt. This can be washed off, and it's advisable to wash them off several times after salt treating them. At the cleaning area or wherever you clean your catch, remember, sanitation is very important.
Be sure to have extra clean ice available to keep fish that have already been chilled cold after cleaning. If you follow these tips, you're in for some mighty good eating.
It goes without saying, the more you fish a particular lake, the more you're going to know about it, and the easier it's going to be to find a pattern. You'll also have the advantage of knowing similar spots the moment you do find a pattern. The main reason for searching for a pattern is that fishing time is limited and usually short. And to maximize the utilization of the limited time all of us have, it makes sense to catch fish, and finding the pattern is the easiest way. Today, we've established a mighty fine pattern in the form of a long secondary point that extends way out from the shoreline here all the way out to this position just about right here. This type pattern is a classic because it has all the features that really attract bass. An open water feeding area, a hard chunk rock bottom with a few scattered stumps, and a creek channel skirting right down the edge of it. For an area of this type to be productive, it must have deeper water close by, which this one has, and also, if some cover is nearby, it makes it that much more attractive. As you can see, the creek channel meanders its way down the lake and butts into the secondary point way out in the lake away from the main lake point. Bass instinctively use channels to carry them to the warmer, cooler feeding and spawning areas of a lake, similar to the way we travel from place to place, on a street, down a road, or on the highway. A channel to a bass is basically an underwater highway, and when this submerged route runs into a secondary point like we have here, watch out. Another interesting thought is that bass, especially schools of larger bass, must have an escape route regardless if they're shallow or deep, and their favorite escape route is into deeper water. As you can see here on this illustration, we have 3 5-foot interval lines extending out from the shoreline into deeper water. Notice the left side of the point, just how far it is from 5 feet of water to 15 feet of water. Now look at the right side of the secondary point where the interval lines run very close together. This indicates a sharp drop. The right side ledge of this point drops from 5 to 25 feet deep into the channel bed, whereas the left side slopes from 5 feet on out to 15 feet and on out to the floor of the lake. Now, the key way of fishing a place like this, I'm going to use a series of fan casts, fishing really from my left back to my right and trying to pinpoint the exact location that the bass are using in this particular area. It could be right in here on the 5 foot, or it could be further back this way on the 5 foot. By fishing an area this way, I'll know I've covered the area. A major mistake many fishermen make is not working the area well, making only a couple of casts, then moving on. You can miss a nice school of bass by only a few feet. Oh, here we go. Better get in here. Back under the boat. You do anything, get off, won't you? Well, I'm gonna make it easy for you. Ooh, you barely hooked, you barely hooked, you barely hooked. Don't you jump. Not bad. Get on back down there with your buddies. I want to talk to you about a subject that's very, very important to outdoorsmen. I know it's summertime, 88 degrees, but fall will be here before we know it and on into the winter. I want to talk to you about hypothermia. What is hypothermia and how does it kill? Well, hypothermia means lowered deep body temperatures. In cold water, the skin and external tissues become cool very rapidly, but it takes about 10 to 15 minutes before the temperature of the heart and the brain begin to cool. Intense shivering occurs in a futile attempt to increase the body's heat production and counteracts the large heat loss. Unconsciousness can occur when deep body temperatures falls from the normal 99 degrees to approximately 89.6 degrees. And heart failure is the usual cause of death when deep body temperatures cool, say below the 86 degree Fahrenheit.
Hypothermia, the loss of body heat to the water, is a major cause of deaths in boating accidents, especially when the water temperature is below 70 degrees. Often the cause of death is listed as a drowning, but most often the primary cause is hypothermia, and the secondary cause is drowning. After an individual has given way to hypothermia, he will lose consciousness and then drown. The illustrations on the screen shows the effects of hypothermia. As you can see, the warmer the water, the greater your chances are for survival. And also, a personal flotation device, a PFD, can not only help save your life, it can increase your survival time because of the insulation it provides. Naturally, the warmer the water, the less insulation one will require. Now, here are a few points to remember about hypothermia protection. Number 1, while afloat in the water, don't attempt to swim unless it's to reach a nearby boat or a fellow survivor, or a floating object on which you can lean or climb on. Unnecessary swimming increases the rate of body heat loss. Always try to keep your head up out of the water. This will greatly lessen heat loss and increase your survival time. Number 2, you got to keep a positive attitude about your survival and rescue. This will improve your chances of extending your survival time until rescue. Your will to live does wonders. 3, if there's more than one person in the water, huddling is recommended while waiting to be rescued. This action tends to reduce the rate of heat loss and naturally increases survival time. Number 4, it's smart to always wear your PFD, especially during the times when water temperatures are below 70 degrees and when you're moving on the water. A PFD won't help you fight off the effects of hypothermia if you don't have it on when you go overboard. Remember, safe boating is no accident. Now right here I'll show you another little quick tip since we're talking about tips. How many times do you hang a bait and you reach up here and you take the time to bring the rod to you to get that bait undone? Well, so many times a bait will hang on a rod tip. Well, one key tip, just take the rod with the crankbait there. Don't pull it to you. Just take your hand and place it right here under the rod. Now watch the bait when I tap the back of the rod. Jumps right off. It'll do it every time, or 95 times out of 100. So when it hangs like that, don't try to shake your rod to shake it off. All you're going to do is just tangle the bait up, as I said. All you want to do, put pressure right here, just a small tap on the back, and it'll jump right off. Just tap it just like that. It'll jump off every time. Well, in the last hour, we've shared what we feel are some mighty fine tips on our favorite sport, fishing. And I sincerely hope that they help you catch many more fish. But before we close out, let me ask for your help in preserving this great sport. Keep only the fish you can use and release the rest, so that our children and their children can experience the same thrills and the fun of fishing that you and I have shared.